I would like to introduce our first speakers, Karl Anthony, in conversation with Mary Evelyn Tucker. Karl Anthony is a renowned environmental justice advocate. I first came across his work in college, in his journal, Race, Nature, and the Environment. And he recently has a new book out, The Earth, the City, and the Hidden Narrative of Race, that connects the logics behind slavery, community disinvestment, and environmental exploitation to address the most pressing issues of our time in a cohesive and foundational manner. Mary Evelyn Tucker, who is the co-founder and co-director of the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, will be in conversation with Karl about his book, and I'll introduce Mary Evelyn more extensively before her talk later in the day. So many thanks to Karl and Mary Evelyn for being here and sharing Karl's very important.
So, thank you, Elizabeth. I presume you can hear. First, a great shout out of appreciation to Elizabeth Allison, and especially to her students, Kim Carfor and Dr. Elizabeth McAnally. Where are they? They all deserve great shout outs. Thank you. CIS for hosting us once again and bringing together such a fabulous community of people. And as I begin this interview with someone I admire enormously, I also just want to thank Dr. Paloma Pavel, because she's been very critical to helping Karl get this new book out and to a great deal of his work. So can we just thank So Karl, what is so fantastic about this book that you've been working on for your whole life, and I'm just so thrilled to see it all put together and all these stories. And I want our group here to just share a couple of the stories to begin with. And one of them is your brother Louis. He grew up in Philadelphia and so on, and he wanted to take folks up to Maine to see a solar eclipse. So why don't we begin right there? We had such an opportunity this summer with an eclipse, and it just electrified the whole country. Why did this electrify your brother? And give us a feel for that moment.
Well, I need to say that my brother was at Princeton University. He had been a student, and not at Princeton, but at Haverford College. And he went over there to work with Martin Scorsius, who was an expert in stellar life and death of stars. And during those years, my brother and I both shared a house in upper New Jersey. And he followed his passion, which was astrophysics, and I followed my passion, which was architecture. But at the same time, when I first met my brother's colleagues, I was getting very deeply involved in the civil rights movement, and we had a student project which brought together many students from all parts of New York to do a tutoring project in Harlem. And my brother wasn't really very much interested in the civil rights movement at the time. He was more into the physics and a lot into the music of the period. But on July 20th, there was a solar eclipse of the sun. And what he had agreed to do was to come to Harlem and organize and teach a group of students, about 50 students, to go travel 500 miles north to Maine to see a full eclipse of the sun. And I can tell you, I was not on that trip, but the memory of that solar eclipse is etched into my mind. And it was really an important part of my understanding of our connection, all of our connection with the universe.
Well, it's riveting, as I've heard you tell it over the years, and it leads into why Thomas Berry was such a transformative moment for you when you encountered his work.
Well, I had been pursuing my own effort to try to put together two things that seemed to be somewhat incongruous. One was my interest in civil rights and the civil rights movement, which was growing all during the 1960s and toward to the end of the 60s and early 70s, and my interest in commitment to architecture and urban planning. So I spent all my years trying to put together a puzzle that would make sense out of those two fields of study. And then, as historic events would have it, the civil rights movement was winding down. New people were coming into the fore as shapers of the way that we think that Native Americans have been in America for a long time. We hadn't heard much from them. And then the Latino population, Asian American population. So I was really confronted with this conundrum of how to put together all these things in a story that was actually a personal story. And I went through a substantial crisis, and I came across a book called Dream of the Earth. And this was really a fantastic moment of realization for me that actually we need a new story. And Thomas Berry provided the outlines of that new story. And I was tremendously moved by that. And I think it's really shaped all of my work over the last 30, 40 years. So I can talk about that for another 40 years.
Exactly. Well, I think it's a segue because you have done so much work. It's just astonishing in environmental justice, in architecture, in urban planning, and so on. And we do understand that you wanted to tell this story, which Thomas and Brian in Universe Story outlined, right? It's a massive book, took 10 years to do, but not everything can be included. So humans, all humans actually, are fairly minimalized in that original account, and even in Journey of the Universe. And the invitation, as you put in your book, is to continue to tell the story and bring the humans into the story. And you are one of the very first to do exactly that. And so when you continue to tell the story, I don't know if you want to tell just one story from Reconstruction even. I mean, we're experiencing white supremacy now. It's old, folks. And if you see this book, you know, the stories are riveting about what happened in the South after the Civil War. So maybe just one story from Reconstruction that would illustrate why justice is taking a long time.
Well, you know, there's so many stories about civil rights and the environment and justice that are scarcely noted today. But I will just mention one. When the federal troops were wanting to elevate their campaigns in the South, they went to an island that had the original African slaves comes in this island just off the coast of Georgia, and General Sherman, who did the famous March to the Sea, and finally breaking up the Confederacy, decided to go have a conversation with the ministers from this island. And they actually, he wanted to find out what they wanted, and they said, they met with him and they said, well, the white people don't want us much. So we just need to have access to land. We've been working this land for several generations without remuneration. And so the essence of it was that Sherman promised them 40 acres and a mule. Now, it became a famous statement that actually anticipated all the land reforms that were promised and many that were not realized. So Sherman made that point to Lincoln during the Christmas period of 1864, I think it was. And they set off to do that. And by the way, the person who got to be chosen to really make this announcement was Oliver Howard, who became well known as a figure who was lifted up at Howard University. And so we have also a whole series of things around universities in the South that really took off during Reconstruction. So that's just one story. There are many stories that we could tell, but, ranging from the Underground Railroad and the struggles for freedom.
So part of what you're helping us to do and what's happening in our society right now is to tell our own story, to tell our history in its fullness and so on, and maybe not just criticize other countries that aren't telling theirs fully. So this is part of the gift of this book. It's really quite extraordinary, the stories that you tell of the history. And I want to bring it forward, though, because you're telling this for a healing sensibility to be brought forward so that environment, justice, the earth, the city, the universe can be seen together. There's no one, actually, that I know that's doing all of that. Many people are doing parts of it, and that's the gift of this book. So I want to just focus in, because it's such a big task that you've done with the Ford Foundation and through Breakthrough Communities has documented this, but maybe you can give us an example of these Metropolitan Sustainable Community Initiatives.
Well, I'd like to make another shout out to Dr. Gravel. She edited a book called Breakthrough Communities, Sustainability and Justice in the Next American Metropolis, which I believe you endorsed the book on the back of the cover. And this book summarized the work that we both had done together at the Ford Foundation, where we were privileged in a remarkable way to have about $40 million to give out to people. And what we actually chose to do, and what they invited me to do because of the work that we had done at Urban Habitat, was to try to find a bridge between the social justice agenda and the environmental agenda, which is becoming a really important and urgent thing. And the business community had come up with a kind of a slogan about smart growth, and looking at the idea of putting together the economic agenda and the environmental agenda. But the problem with it is that in the concept of smart growth, there was not any articulation of facing the social justice requirements that have been overlooked over many generations in this country. So the portfolio that I ran was a Sustainable Metropolitan Communities Initiative. And that initiative sought to build a bridge. And the bridge was created by generating a grants program that went to social justice organizations who were interested in environmental issues. And we had about 60 grantees, ranging from the labor unions to church groups and civil rights groups and many other groups that worked on these issues. And all that is documented in the book that Dr. Gravel has written. It's called Sustainability and Justice in the Next American Metropolis.
Yeah. Maybe you want to give just one example of like West Garfield in Chicago and the Chihuly exhibit. It's such a great story.
It's really terrific. In Chicago, there was a large conservatory, and the city had made an announcement that they were going to tear this conservatory down and build low-income housing. And everybody knows that low-income housing is really important and urgent issue. But this conservatory was rather extraordinary. It contained plants that had been gathered from all over the world. And the problem with the situation was that only a few people went in there every year. 20 or 30 people went in this huge conservatory that was completely empty. And So the proposal to tear this conservatory down was met by this group in West Garfield, Chicago, and it was led by, I'm trying to remember her name now, she's a Mary Nelson, yeah. Bethel Newlight, another woman. There's many things that are led by women. Anyway, she worked with this community organization that she had founded, and they convinced the city to actually reverse their policy and to save this extraordinary piece of architecture and environmental history. And what they did is they did something very remarkable. They reached out to a world famous artist who did glass sculpture, and he created a program in that particular location. It would be a permanent exhibit of this glass sculpture that was intertwined with these plants that were kept, and it was an extraordinary coalition of common agenda that attracted some 500,000 or 600,000 visitors per year, and it became an attraction that helped to finance the transformation of the whole low-income neighborhood to include many things that were added, including the first building that met all the standards for environmental. The Leeds building. They revised the transportation system going from the downtown through the Garfield neighborhood to the suburbs. These people from this group went out and organized people in the suburbs to support the transportation system. So there's so many dimensions to that that we could also spend the morning talking about.
Yeah. That's what's so great about each of these examples and so many of the other ones in Karl's life, that brings together often women for putting something together, often churches or synagogues or some religious force beginning to create a movement, creating community, but bringing together the finance part of it, the transportation part of it, the architecture part of it. It's quite mind-boggling, the areas that Karl has been able to pull together. And I wanted to just circle back to some of the people you mentioned towards the end of your book. Are these women, some well-known and some not so well-known? And I love that Wikipedia is trying to get more women onto Wikipedia. The New York Times realized their obituary section has been ignoring women. Sylvia Plath didn't even have an obituary, so we're catching up, folks. But some of these people, fortunately, living women, I'd love you to just maybe mention one or two you've worked with, but I have a list. Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow laws, and if you don't know that book, it'd be really great. And of course, Angela Davis and her sister, Fania Davis, and so on. So maybe just pick up some of these women and give us a feel for what they're doing and their drive. And Michelle Alexander might be fun to begin with.
Well, Michelle Alexander is really in the forefront of this movement to address the imprisonment of people of color, particularly American Jews in this country, and has provided guidance for how we need to mobilize our communities. And that her effort has resulted in the closing of a number of prisons. And she's been all over the country in communities everywhere as a spokesperson for that. But I think that is really important. But the story of women in the environment and the story of women in their struggle is, goes back a long way. And, I mentioned everybody knows about Harriet Tubman, and it's really that story alone could fill volumes about how this woman organized the people on the plantations to escape to places that were relatively safe. And this, by the way, is a multiracial story. People think a lot about the importance of coalition politics and identity politics, but it was a multiracial story, and many of the people who traveled from the South hid in the attics and the basements that were owned by white people who were friends of the African American movement, even if they were suppressed in the larger society of the South at that time. And they escaped to locations all over the country in the North and the South and Mexico and many other ways. And Harriet Tubman was the heroine of that movement and really the founder of it. So the Ida B. Wells, and I want to mention Ida B. Wells is really important, but I also like to mention a book by Dorothy Spain. You might want to put this down. It's called How Women Saved the City. And this was a remarkable book that documents the work of many women all over the country that really played such a pivotal role in the development of cities around the turn of the century, 20th century, including a woman who got a Nobel Prize for starting all the settlement houses in the country, Jane Addams. Yeah, and then of course we have from Kenya, Wangari Maathai also won a Nobel Prize, and we have contemporary women and more contemporary women that were active in the civil rights movement. We can think of Ella Baker. She now has a center named after her, Ella Baker, and she was a founder of this, helping this bridge the gap between the elders in the African American community and the students who were so active. So we could go on and on. We have many stories of women who've been participants.
I'm so glad you mentioned Harriet Tubman, because I think she is unfortunately overlooked sometimes. But I also want to come to this question that you raised towards the end of your book, where I'm picking up, but I'd like to draw you out, where you say, in your earlier life, even as a child, you would speak about some of the great civil rights people, or Du Bois, or George Washington Carver, or a whole range of people in your class, right, in Philadelphia. Yeah. And people would completely ignore it. And that, in a way, went through a good part of your life, and so on, and being on boards, and people not really listening to you. You know, you've been very influential on so many boards. But I loved that at the end of the book, it seemed to be that you were saying people are listening now, that there's an awakening. And I just wanted to draw you out on that.
Well, first of all, I think we're looking at the emergence of a global movement, and the power of that has yet to be really fully reckoned. But and it's also fundamentally a grassroots movement. And you know, Thomas Berry wrote a book called The Great Work, and it's our belief that this movement that is arising all across the world to confront the challenges of climate change and climate justice is actually an important example of the great work of our time. And not only is it important in terms of the specifics, but it also connects to so many other threads. And I'm really honored to be a witness and being a supporter of bringing all these threads together in order for us to rise to probably the major challenge of the 21st century, which is to protect the earth and the plants and the animals and all of the items that were really addressed by Mary and Brian Slim in the Universe story. Brian Slim and Thomas Berry in the Universe story. So this one of the really important themes in my book is discovering new foundations for the great work of our time.
I think that might be a good note to conclude on. But I just, if you want to say maybe just one final word to draw you out on the notion of why does this perspective of a universe story, why does this sense that we know now we're from stardust and so on, right down to plate tectonics, the African continent and so on, how does it give us energy for the great work that needs to be done.
Well, I can speak for myself, and one of the wonderful things about the emergence of the news story in the 21st century, because it is new, and because it is so connected to so much of value for everyone in the world, it has made it possible, I believe, to tell the story of slavery, which is a hideous crime, stealing 12 million Africans from the continent and kidnapping of them and making them work for free for several generations. This is a very hard story to tell to people. People really want to turn away. But it gives us a context in which to raise that. And then as we look around at the whole issue of colonization and look at the genocide of Native Americans, we have a story that can connect many people who've been struggling, whose efforts have not been documented, including, frankly, many people of European heritage who have evidently forgotten, or maybe they haven't been able to tell their story of the pain and struggle to come over to this country. And of course, the point that's being made today is the importance of women who represent half of humanity, whose story has been buried and scratched. So I think it gives us an umbrella that can connect all of these elements, but at the same time, it offers a challenge to us to go deeply into the important lessons from people from all kinds of backgrounds. And so I'm really privileged to be part of that work.
Let's give a round of applause for reminding me, if you want to pursue this further, clearly this book is extraordinary. There's some copies here, the Breakthrough Community book from MIT. The Conversations from Journey of the Universe, we'll make sure you can get a link to watch that, password protected, where I interview Karl. It's marvelous, along with Belby Rooks, who's terrific, and other women. But Karl, your ongoing work, your eloquence about this thread that connects us all, we are so grateful to you to have persisted all these years and been a partner in this work. Thank you so much.
Okay.